Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Get Your House in Order. This is Elke Rubach, and today we're very happy to have Brian Crombie here. We met many years ago during COVID. He interviewed me for Saga 960, and he's back. He's done a million of things. He's ran for politics. He comes from the finance world. He's still a radio host, and now he's the CEO of a real estate development company. Brian, thank you for being here. Welcome, and so nice to see you again.
My pleasure. Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, it's always a pleasure seeing you, and it's you move fast. We met, and you were only, focusing on the radio, but then I found out that you were running for office. You've done a lot: finance, media, politics. How do you keep your own life from becoming chaotic? And what's your version of getting your house in order?
Calendar and to-do lists. I've got to keep a calendar of everything that's going on and a to-do list. And I just every Sunday I put together what I got to do that week. And I never get it all done, but I try to get it done. But if without a to-do list, and I break the to-do list into business, personal, and radio and some other activities, so that I segment the to-do list into different topic areas. But seriously, that's the most important thing.
And that sounds busy enough. So then you decide to run for office. So stepping into politics, when you decided to run for mayor of Mississauga, you clearly saw that something needed to change or something could be improved. That's not a small thing. What made you look and say, it's time to help this place get in order?
Well, a few things. So I've been very involved in politics and city civic issues in Mississauga for a while. I've lived in Mississauga for 24 years. I was chair of the Mississauga City Summit for 7 years. I was president of the Mississauga Arts Council for 7 years. I've been involved in athletics and BIAs and Rotaries and all that kind of stuff. So I was reasonably involved in Mississauga. Then second of all, I had this radio show. I'm on every night at 6 o'clock on 960 AM, and I've interviewed a whole bunch of people about a lot of the issues about Mississauga and wider than just Mississauga. And then three, just about this time of the year, on April Fool's Day a year ago, I posted an April Fool's joke about me running for mayor in the by-election, and this was what my policy agenda would be. And I got a whole bunch of people emailing me, messaging me, phoning me up, calling me, saying, "Great, go run, we'll support you," etc. And they really liked what I had said in the agenda. They didn't realize it was an April Fool's joke. So after the April Fool's joke, I got to thinking, maybe I should do it. And I guess, therefore, the real reason is because of my history and because I had put together this agenda, I got the impression that the other people, the other candidates, weren't addressing the problems. And we've got some significant issues in Mississauga. And they still haven't been addressed. I criticized that we had underrepresented the tax increases. We had talked about it being a 2 to 3% tax increase when they're actually, 8 to 9%. And this year, again, the tax increases are in that 8 to 9% range. The expenses are up 8 to 9%. I criticized the housing starts and the lack of housing affordability and the lack of attention to housing. And as you may have known, finally this year, after numerous years of denial at City Council, they've proposed massive reductions in development fees and some straightening out of some of the red tape and regulations. I criticized crime statistics, and this year the Peel budget went up 23%. Now I think it's outrageous that a budget would go up by 23%, because what if any budget goes up by 23%? What that says is you really were not doing your job in prior years. If something was wrong that you had to increase by 23%. And so, if the crime statistics are such that it justifies an almost a quarter increase in your budget at, 23%, that's front page news. It should have been front page news, but it wasn't. And, it says that I think there was lack of attention. And I think at the same time as that 23% increase, it passed council, but the mayor voted against it. So clearly there's a controversy there that we, as the people, don't know. If the mayor's voting against the increase, and yet council believes it's critically important and votes for it, I think there's an issue that we need to be well aware of, and I don't think we are. Transit was one of my other issues, and we've been talking about all-day two-way go on the Milton-Mississauga line for 2 decades. And Premier Ford promised it again in this last provincial election, and nothing's happened. Metrolinx, in the big move, said it was an 8-to-1 benefit to cost ratio of making it all-day two-way, frequent GO train service, comparable to that all-day GO service on the Lakeshore line. And 8-to-1, they say, is the best benefit to cost ratio of any transit in all of North America. Most are in that 2-to-3 range. The Scarborough subway station, was less than a 1-to-1 benefit to cost ratio. So if you've got such an incredibly valuable opportunity, why not do it? And yet we haven't done it. And I could go on, but I think that I believe that the current councillors that were all running, there were 4 of them that were running for mayor, are part of the problem, or we're part of the problem. And the fact that our budgets are still going up by 9%, in an era of bringing inflation down, in an era of people reducing taxes everywhere, how can you increase things by 9%? How can you increase a police budget by 23%? If the OPP increased their budget by 23%, we'd be going, what the blank is wrong? If the RCMP or CISA said, we need a 23% increase, people would go crazy. Nothing happened.
Well, but to me, as you know, I'm pretty vocal. And the challenge I find with any increases, listen, I have no shortage of ideas on how to spend your money, right? The problem is there's no accountability. And when there's no accountability, there's no respect for authority.
Well, and we had 24% turnout. What that says is the people didn't care. They're paying 9%, 8%, and they're being told that it's only 2 to 3%, but it's actually 8 to 9. You're a finance person. Let me explain this to you and see what you think of it. So the overall expense increase for Peel was like, let's say it's 9%. Mm-hmm. And what they said is half of that, 4%, is the tax increase for Mississauga, and the other half, 5%, is the tax increase for Peel. And so they said the tax increases were only 4%. But Mississauga actually went up by 9%, and Peel went up by 10%, and the two together went up by 8.5%. So they were adding these two numbers together to try to make it look like the percentage increases for both Mississauga and Peel were lower, because what they were doing is they were dividing the Mississauga increase by last year's Mississauga and Peel taxes. And then they were dividing the Peel increase by last year's Mississauga and Peel taxes. The denominator was twice as large in every calculation. It made no sense. People didn't pay attention. It was crazy.
And there's an apathy. And did you notice who was in charge, who was interested, who really wanted to be part of this? Because when you have such a low turnover or turnout, it's terrible. Like, how can you demand accountability if you don't even get off your couch and go to vote?
You can't.
Vote for whoever, but go and vote.
You can't, and that's part of the problem. Housing affordability. People that voted tended to be older homeowners and frankly, more Canadian born and whiter. The people that didn't vote were younger, ethnic, and renters. And guess what we're doing a terrible job for? Younger people. And so it's the old adage about, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And so therefore, if it's older people in southern Mississauga that tend to vote, that's who ends up being the people that the council pays attention to, and they shouldn't. And I think that we've got this intergenerational transfer of wealth. We're the first generation in history that is leaving a worse future to our kids than we were given. And it's because of, high debt, high taxes, unaffordable housing, inflation, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's wrong. And yet at the same time, if those young people aren't going to come out and vote,
do they even know they can vote? Do they even know they should vote?
I don't know. They certainly get their voter cards. They certainly see all the election signs. They just don't think they can make a difference, and they don't vote. We've seen plummeting voter turnout statistics, provincially, federally, and municipally. It's worse municipally. If the turnout on average is 24%, but yet it's like over 60% for older people, guess what it is for young people? It's like less than single digits. It's like 5-6% turnout. And at the same time, there were a couple of young people that were running for mayor. They were excellent. There was this one gal, she was in university. She was Muslim, hijab wearing lady. She had some incredibly good ideas. There was another guy who was a musician. He was in his 30s. He had some incredibly good ideas. There was a real estate agent broker that had some really good ideas. None of them were invited onto the stages, into the debates. And so therefore, we ask ourselves, how come we can't motivate young people to come out and vote? Well, we tell them they're not allowed even to be in the debate stage. We are excluding them from democracy, and then we question, why aren't they involved in democracy? It's stupid. And the people, who the people were that were excluding these people and myself from the debates? They were people that were in charge of the ratepayers organizations that are there to try to increase the voice of the unheard, the people that are, not elected representatives. We have a problem with the execution of democracy. We do. And that's another reason why I wanted to get involved. But no, I agree with you. I think accountability is an issue. And one of the things that I firmly believe in is the right of recall. We don't have the right of recall in Canada. You do have it in Alberta, and you do have it in the United States. And recall doesn't happen that often. But if you ever threaten a recall, people smarten up real quick.
But I mean, I know what it is, but for the audience that probably doesn't even know what that means, what is that?
A recall is when you have a petition where a certain number of the electors say they want to have a special election to unseat somebody or to call another election, a by-election. You can actually recall somebody and effectively put them on notice and potentially fire them, an elected representative. And it's happened often in the United States. And I think that, again, people smarten up real quick if there's even a threat of recall, even if the recalls, you don't get enough names for the recall to be held, and even if you fail the recall, because the last thing a politician wants is to be recalled. So I think that having recall would be extremely helpful. I think that we've got to do a better job of educating people about elections. We got to do a better job of involving more people in the debates. I understand that in the final debates you want the front runners to be the people on stage, but early on I think everyone should be invited, and you have a set process on how you winnow down the stage. The Republican Party in the United States has done this very well, where the first couple of debates everyone's on stage, but then in subsequent rounds you base it based on polls, and the number of people gets limited. Well, that's an objective way of doing it. There's not an objective way of doing it in our system. It's based on who the host is, who they want to have on stage. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, because I think we're trying to educate the population, and such an incredible right. People have died to get these rights, and the apathy that goes with it. And then you don't collaborate, you don't work for the city, you don't volunteer, you don't do anything but complain, and yet you don't vote. To me, if you don't vote, you don't complain, period.
Well, I think what ends up happening is people, because they don't feel like their voice counts and they're not heard, they end up protesting. There's civil disobedience, and then ultimately there's riots. And I think, and there's been lots of people in Canada that talked about this, that we've got a issue with affordability, such that at some point in time, I think there is a risk of civil unrest. There's just too many young people that have lost the dream of home ownership, because we've stolen it from them. And I'm hopeful that, we'll change things before it ever gets to that civil unrest time period. But, we've done it. And you think about sort of the Occupy movement back, when was it, 10, 15 years ago? It happened, and there was civil unrest. You think about Black Lives Matter, people were upset, and there was civil unrest. You go back to, the protests against the Vietnam War in the United States. So I think you've got to, even the trucker convoy. And, I've talked about this a lot of times. I disagreed with what the trucker convoy was talking about, but there were 15% of Canadians that agreed with the trucker convoy. 15% of Canadians is a lot of people. And you deserve to be heard. And the Prime Minister at the time didn't even want to go meet them. And because of our first past the post system, they didn't have representation in Parliament. The People's Party of Canada had like 8% of the popular vote, but didn't elect any people. If they were in Parliament, then the trucker convoy's attitudes and opinions would have been heard. So people's voice needs to be heard. And when you stifle that voice, when you don't allow that voice to be represented on the debate stage or in Parliament or in public discourse, people will resort to protests, civil disobedience, or riots.
And it's hard to manage that. If there was something that Canada had right, was the immigration system. And right now the floodgate was open incredibly irresponsibly to a generation that shows up with some funky visas. They don't have a job because by definition the visa doesn't allow them to work. The infrastructure cannot possibly service all these people. What are they going to do? And we're surprised that the crime rates are going up. Is that a surprise to who?
Well, so I think we had a very good immigration system that was based on points, and Australia, New Zealand, UK, etc. actually came to Canada to look at the Canadian immigration system as a good immigration system. I think where it ended up being messed up was foreign students and the temporary workers, and we allowed way too many people in for temporary workers post COVID. Because a lot of companies were petitioning the government for those temporary workers, and the government opened up the floodgates in that regard, as you correctly point out. But also the students and the student visa program, the foreign student visa program, was effectively a fast track or artificial means to Canadian residency. And it should have been. And so some of those people that came in were bona fide students going to bona fide universities and getting, their education. And that is allowed and should continue to be allowed. But there are too many that were coming in to go to private colleges that had artificial programs, and really it was an excuse that they could come here. And the costs are high. And so therefore they had to get part-time jobs, and they ended up working in Tim Hortons or whatever and living in basements. And I think it was a big issue. And it was a fast track way for them to try to get Canadian residency. And that was wrong. It should not be. That it bastardized the immigration system. Now, the problem is then you've got the response, and the response is going to be that our population is actually going to go down. And I don't think that's right. Our population should be growing, but growing at a reasonable rate. And, I think lots of people have talked about how we're last year in 2024, we were in a per capita GDP recession. Our GDP was not declining in absolute terms. And so we weren't technically in a recession, but on a per capita basis, it was. And so the only reason why the GDP was growing was because we were adding population. Well, in 2025 and 2026, I think our GDP is going to have real challenges growing because of trade wars and housing and a whole bunch of other reasons. But it's going to have even bigger problem because the population is going to go down because we're,
and not to mention, in the last 3 or 4 years, the government has inflated numbers incredibly. The number of people that got hired by the government that doesn't produce anything have grown tremendously. I
don't think it's fair to say not anything, but I do think that you're right that the only area has been public sector hiring, and I think we need some of that. So let's not just paint it like I think we need to dramatically increase our employment in the military. I think that we have done a bad job. I think that we need to have more nurses and more doctors. The fact that there are more people in the CRA than there are in the military is wrong. And so I think that we to say just public service jobs are wrong. I don't think that's right. But I do think that we have been growing the civil service in an inefficient, unproductive manner. And we need to be thinking about the right places to grow employment in the public service rather than just everywhere.
And I'm connected to the medical world, and I see that we have nurses, but they cannot afford to live near hospitals.
I think housing affordability is a massive issue. And, Vaughan and Mississauga now that have cut development fees dramatically, I think have made a big move forward. I've actually this week on my show got my 12-point plan for how to solve the housing crisis. And I think that it's, after defense and after Trump, it is the number one. So number three, it's the top issue in Canada today. And I do think that, we risk the Manhattanization of Toronto, where, any service worker, any nurse, any, minimum wage person, anyone working in a restaurant, et cetera, has to live in Milton or Alliston or Oshawa and commute in. They can't afford to live in Toronto. I think that we're not building any single family homes. And so we've robbed our younger generation of the dream of single family home ownership. We are building condos that are way too small to raise a family in because we've had this investor-led boom in condos, and we have not thought about the right thing for what people need to live in. And that's because 31% of the cost of a house are taxes and development fees. And so I think that we've got to change that dramatically. And reducing the development fees, I think, should be to zero for houses less than $1 million. I think it should be 50% for houses less than $2 million. And I think it should be down by 25% for anything north of that. I think we should be cutting the red tape and regulation dramatically because time is money, and if it takes twice as long to approve a development as it does to build it, that's crazy. And we've heard the complaints about how long it takes to get a mine approved or a pipeline approved. Well, it takes just as long to get a house approved, which doesn't make any logical sense. So I think we got to do a far better job of efficiency in red tape and regulations. And we've heard a lot of late about interprovincial trade barriers, and a lot of people didn't realize that we had these interprovincial trade barriers and that they're so expensive. And I think we should get rid of them. Well, we've got intermunicipal trade barriers. One of the reasons why we've got low productivity in housing is because the rules are different in every municipality. And some people tell me that in different wards, the rules are different because it depends on whether your councillor and the city planner appointed for that ward are pro-development or anti-development, or are pro-setbacks or anti-setbacks, or are pro-height or anti-height, which means that effectively the political process is such that we've got intermunicipal trade barriers that don't allow economies of scale in building. Well, it doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, that's criminal. Honestly, I find it criminal. And then, okay, let's say you house them. Now you have to send them to school. Where do we build the schools? Where are the teachers? Like right now, finding a teacher is hard. And who's going to pay for that?
Right now what we've got is we've got a surplus of university professors because of all the foreign students that are no longer going to be coming in. And I think part of the problem with teachers and nurses is that we don't pay appropriately. And so, the number of people in civil service jobs versus what you pay them is an issue. And I think we need to ensure that we pay adequately. And lots of people have talked about how we underpay teachers and we underpay nurses. Now, we're not suggesting that, we've got to increase the salaries dramatically, but we need to attract people, good people, into those jobs. And the problem with the private colleges is they paid a little bit more, so they attracted a whole bunch of people, and they were teaching foreign students that were here just to get a visa and a fast track to permanent residency. So we've got to rethink our system.
So let's talk about the arts. What about the arts is that resonates with you? Why are you so involved? Tell me a little bit of your parkour through the arts and community.
Well, you're into fashion, and so we've all got a passion, and we all think. I think everyone wants to have an outlet for creativity. I was a singer in a band when I was in high school. And that was one outlet for my creativity. I worked for the Walt Disney Company in Los Angeles earlier in my life, and so that was sort of the business side of creativity. I think that people have this incredible desire to be creative. I think music speaks to us. I think we get empathy from reading books and watching movies and watching other people's lives and immersing ourselves in other people's lives for 2 hours in a movie or for 2 days in a book. And I think it gives heart to communities. And so I think the arts are incredible. Just this past month, on Friday night, I went to a one-person, one-act show by a lady that was one of the best actresses I've ever met. You think about a one-person show. She memorized an hour-long script with no interaction from anyone else. It was absolutely amazing. And then I went to The Lion King, and the puppeteering was amazing. And then I went to the show about Live Aid, and the music was amazing. Arts. And then I went to Snow White, and the ballet, and the orchestra was amazing. There is wonderful art in our city and culture in our city, and to share it is fantastic. And there's something different. I love movies, but to see it as part of a crowd, a part of an audience, is so very special.
And how did you get connected to the arts?
So I was chairman of the Mississauga City Summit, and did that for 7 years, and really enjoyed that involvement and the role that I was playing and the influence that I was having on the city. And then my ex-wife ran for and became mayor of the city of Mississauga, and so it was a little bit of a conflict. I don't actually think it was a conflict, but some people thought there was a conflict. And so I decided that I should leave that role as chair of the city summit, and I was offered the position of president of the Arts Council. And so it was a way of staying involved in the community, but less sort of a high profile civic advocacy role as the city summit. So that's why I made the move. I had been involved in the Arts Council previously, just because I love the arts and wanted to be supportive of the arts, but became the president because of my ex-wife.
And tell me, clearly you're busy Monday to Sunday. What does free time look for you like for you?
So I love just walking. I enjoy walking through a village, through a shopping area, through a park. I don't own a dog anymore. My best friend dog passed away, regrettably, but my son got a new dog, which I get to babysit once in a while, and I love it when I do. And so I dog walk, and then when I don't dog walk, I try to walk like I was walking the dog. And so that's wonderful. In the summertime, I have a pool, and so I swim a lot. I have a canoe, so I canoe a bit. I have a bike, so I bike a bit. None of those as much as I'd like to, but I do some of that. This summer, I bought a membership for a tennis club that's behind my house, and so I'm hoping that I'm going to play a little bit more tennis. But I don't do enough of that recreational stuff. I love politics. I love news, and so I spend time eating up news and politics, which is probably not healthy for me, but I like it.
Well, there's no shortage of feeding going on these days. You've worn a lot of hats. What's the one non-negotiable for you that you stick to that helps you keep things from going totally off rails?
The one non-negotiable, I guess, time with my kids. If my kids want to have dinner with me or brunch with me or something like that, I'll cancel anything for that.
How old are they now?
35, 31, 28.
I could see that. Married with kids?
Two of them got married last summer, and I had the pleasure of going to Muskoka for one wedding and to Manchester, England for the other one. And I got to do a toast to the bride and toast to the groom. Got to dance with the bride, father-daughter dance, and so it was a very special occasion. But no, I think that's it's that old adage about they don't want to spend as much time with you anymore as you wanted to spend with them, and maybe it'll circle when they've got grandchildren they want you to take care of. But if they call and invite me for dinner or brunch, I'll show.
Well, I heard once this adage of, if you pay, they shall come.
Well, that's probably true, but I sometimes actually they pay, which is like really a shocking, wonderful experience.
That's fun. And are your political days done?
So I'm on the radio every night at 6 o'clock, and not all, but probably half of my shows are somewhat political. So yesterday I did a show on Eastern Europe. I had a guy from from Latvia, talking about. He was actually in your business, but had spent time in St. Petersburg and Moscow, and now in Latvia, and knows a lot about what's going on. And to actually speak to someone that was in business in strategic consulting, financial advisory services in Eastern Europe, and talk about that was fascinating. So that was a geopolitical show, military show. Tomorrow I've got a show on the housing crisis with a mortgage broker, and I do my 12-point plan for how to solve the housing crisis. Then I've got someone on the Arctic, and one of the things that I am passionate about is our lack of investment in the Arctic, both military and social infrastructure. And so I think that we've got to pay a lot more attention to the Arctic. I've done some shows on the Arctic, and so that's political. That's and the housing stuff is economic and political. But that's three shows that are sort of political out of three. Maybe a little bit business. Then on Thursday, I've got someone that's running a civic advocacy organization representing women's voices and women's voices in politics, but also media, and how too often people reach out to men when they want a quote or something, and trying to make sure that there's representation of female voices in the media. And then on Friday, I've got someone talking about holistic health and someone else talking about moderation in alcohol consumption. So completely, off the wall different. So, that is sort of 4 or 5 shows are somewhat political. And that's sort of my, I tend to do 2 or 3 rants, I call them, but they're really closings for the show where I'll do a 5 to 7 minute, my take on an issue. And really it is tends to be a political, whether it's geopolitical or domestic political or development political. And it's my personal point of view. And then I'll interview the people. And so that ends up being my best avenue for voicing my political points of views, or my point of views on business or economics or whatever it is.
Who have been your top 3, if you can say, interesting, fun, weird, different interviews that you've had along your career?
That's a really interesting question, and I don't know if I could answer. But some of the most interesting ones is Jimmy Pattison. So 90-something years old, the 9 billion billionaire, and talked about his life and his career, and that was absolutely fascinating. I ended up interviewing this professor from the London Business School on erotic capital, and it was really quite interesting. She was talking about charisma, sex appeal, and other things, and she had taken all of that and put it into a theory of erotic capital, which I was, that's kind of interesting. And she took it from a business standpoint. I interviewed a professor from Mount Royal University in New Brunswick, I think it is, on sex workers. And, that was really very interesting. I interviewed someone from Kyiv, Ukraine that, got bombed while we were doing the interview. And he's in the real estate business in Kyiv. And he was talking about, living a life and creating a business and ensuring the safety of his family in the middle of a war. That was pretty interesting. So I've, one of the things that I really like about this gig of being a radio host is I reach out to and get interviews with some absolutely fascinating people. I've interviewed David Peterson and John Tory, politicians that I thought highly of, Elizabeth May, and got to hear about their politics and about their careers and about their lives post-politics. I've interviewed, I interviewed Frank Stronach about his belief in employee rights and capitalism, and then a bunch of the controversy came out about Frank Stronach and sexual assault, etc. I interviewed a lady that had charged him with sexual assault. So 2 sides of a very interesting personality and person. So it's been a fascinating. I've got over 3,000 interviews, over 2,000 shows. I've been doing it for 5 years, 5 days a week. And I love it, and I get exposed to a whole bunch of interesting people. I interviewed you on financial planning, and I get to meet some really interesting people.
That's awesome. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book is The Alchemist.
Yes, I love it.
And I believe a lot of it. I believe there's omens in life. I believe that if you want something bad enough, the whole world conspires to help you achieve it. I believe in, traveling the world to try to find your destiny. And sometimes you find that it's right there under your feet at home. So I think there's some great things in The Alchemist. I like reading several books by the author of The Alchemist. There's a connected book, not a connected book, but a similar book called Siddhartha that I also quite like. I don't like The Secret because I think that both those books are about a lot more effort than The Secret is. So, manifestation, I think, is somewhat true, but the whole idea of The Secret, where you just think it and it comes to pass, I don't believe. I think you got to really work your butt off to achieve things, and that's what Paulo did in The Alchemist. One of the best novels I've ever read is The Winds of War by Hermann Hesse. And
that I have not read.
It's a wonderful book, and he's then written War and Remembrance, both of them about World War II, and they track both a Jewish family as well as a Christian family through their history in World War II, and it depicts the life of people in war, and transitions, and resilience, and death, and life, and I love those books, and I think. And lots of other people have said this, but I really believe it. I think that one of the best ways to develop your empathetic muscles, your empathy, is to read a book, because, particularly if you do it in a concentrated way, like you're on a holiday and so you spend all day reading for a day or two, you disappear into the life of the characters in the novel, and you can't help but be empathetic for those characters, and you learn how they feel, and why they feel, and what their challenges are. And I think that that's a wonderful way to develop your empathy muscle.
And if you look back and you saw little Brian, age 10, what would you tell Brian?
I'd say keep at it. Those times where you felt like it wasn't working out and you were going to give up, keep at it. And don't bang your head against concrete, but and so I still believe in pivoting if things aren't working out, but don't give up completely, and keep at it. I think too many people have this dream, have these desires, and they give up. I had a vision board when I was in my late 20s, and that vision board motivated me to achieve some things in some tough times, and I really believe that. And so I think that that's it. Is that don't give up is too simplistic and trite a saying, but keep at it. Keep struggling. Be resilient. Work hard. I think that someone told me that one of the secrets of good interviewing is be empathetic, be authentic, and be enthusiastic. I think part of life is being empathetic, authentic, and enthusiastic. And so I think that the enthusiasm is don't give up, just keep at it. It's show enthusiasm, be passionate, have purpose.
Well, that's amazing. Brian, I don't want to take up more of your time. Thank you for being here. You've had a fascinating life. I think many would envy you. And it's funny to think that, somebody would say, oh, somebody would envy you. People say, no, they wouldn't. I'm sure it hasn't been easy, but obviously worth it. Thank you for running for office. Don't get disconnected from politics. We need people to speak up and be engaged. I'll continue listening to your radio. We are subscribed to your newsletter. I'll put all your contact information below, and then people can hear you and see what else you interview and who else you comes across your microphone.
Thank you so much. I appreciate chatting with you.
Thank you, Brian, so much. Thank you, everyone. This is Get Your House in Order, and that was Brian Crombie with us tonight.